Welcome to the Belly Dance Stories podcast, a multimedia production directed by Alexandra Molina and Valerie Molinari.
You will hear inspiring conversations and learn about the ways belly dance has become a powerful channel of transformation in people's lives.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Belly Dance Stories podcast. Today, we are super excited. We have a very different guest, and we have the amazing life coach and personal coach, Lisa Zahiya, which I actually had the opportunity to meet her during that crazy pandemic times through a friend of ours, through a Zoom party.
Yes.
And somehow we kept our communication.
Yes.
And now Lisa is visiting Miami for a month.
A month.
And Lisa, for people that are listening and seeing us, we always start the podcast asking, what is your belly dance story?
Sure. Thank you for having me, both of you. So my belly dance story is that I grew up as a dancer, but doing jazz, hip hop, musical theater. And part of my life as a dancer, although I loved it, was a lot of issues with body image. Because especially at those times, it was the 90s, early 2000s, it was smaller, sort of like pre my body type being popular, which is a whole other issue. But so I was doing that. And then I also was very academically oriented. So dance sort of always took a backseat to school. I went to college and I was getting an MBA. And I was teaching hip hop at a dance studio called Joy of Motion in Washington, D.C. And there was a dance class right after mine, and it was belly dance. And it was interesting because all the like dancers would always make fun of belly dance because they were like, oh, it's not real dance. But there was this woman, and she was a teacher, and she was a little bit older. I mean, especially coming from dance where you sort of peaked in your early 20s. And I would always just like stand and watch her class. And I was like, she's so beautiful. And her name was Artemis. And she one day was like, are you going to watch or are you going to come in? And I was like, And I walked in and I just fell in love. And I was in my early 20s. And I found a dance form where I loved the music and I loved the culture. And I loved learning the culture and I loved everything about it. And because of my dance background, I also accelerated very quickly. I started performing very quickly. And so that was probably 4 years after that. I was going through a lot of personal issues. I was getting a divorce. It was in my late 20s. And I was like, I was going to go to law school. And I'd gotten into Georgetown Law. And I remember I called my mom and I was like, I don't want to do this. She's like, don't. You could go later. And I was like, I'm going to be a professional belly dancer. And what's amazing is my parents were like, great, go do it. And they encouraged me to do it. And to make the story short, at that point, I dove into belly dance and started performing and I started teaching. And I moved to Asheville, North Carolina. And while I was there, I was teaching for a year. And then I was like, I'm going to open a studio, especially I had a very strong business background. And I opened a studio that I owned for 14 years. It was called Studio Zahiya. And it was a dance studio that was about humans having positive experiences and transformation through dance. And that was really amazing and transformative part of my life, is being able to create that for people and what we did in that community. And also that business grew, and it was a very large business. I think we closed during the pandemic, which was also sort of a natural thing that was going to happen. And at that time, it was like 400 students a week. There were 14 teachers. We were doing a lot of work in the community. And then parallel to that, I was very lucky to be able to be traveling and teaching belly dance. I taught all over the U.S. I taught internationally. I won some competitions. So belly dance really allowed me to find a dance form where I felt good and I felt accepted. And it also was the way that I started a whole new career in my life.
How did you jump from there to then be a personal and business coach?
Sure. Yeah. So probably like 6 years into it, there were two things that happened that were parallel. One is I saw all the change that dance was making in people's lives. Like even a woman would come to class and she'd be very shy. Then like 2 sessions later, the outfits would change, the earrings would come out, the attitudes would change. And then people were telling me about things they were doing in their life. Like, I'm leaving this relationship. I'm going to go get the job. And I was like, wow, that's happening because of what's happening here. And I got really interested in how people change and why people change, and also what positive, joyful things can do for your life, as opposed to like, oh, I'm going to change and be very serious. And parallel to that, people saw what was happening at my business, where like it was becoming a high 6-figure business, a 7-figure business. And they were like, how did you do that? Can you help me with my business? I'll pay you. And I was like, so at that time, I saw both those things together, and I was like, I'm going to go to coaching school. So I became a coach, and probably for the last 8 years of the business, I was coaching and running the dance studio.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's very inspirational.
I'm a little bit of a overachiever.
Overachiever.
Yeah, I have some
Yes.
issues.
Oh, but that's beautiful, because
you.
it's like another branch of belly dance is to, life coach in a way for you. I feel
Yeah.
like that has naturally been morphed that way. You've created that for yourself.
Yeah. And I, now I'm full-time as a coach. And I also, honestly, I was thinking about it, and I was like, I was teaching dance, and I was in my late 30s, and I was like, I don't know if I want to do this full-time anymore. I want to keep it in my life. But I also had like financial goals. I had what I wanted to do with my body to be able to travel. I also was interested in being less tied to a geographical place, which now I am not at all. And so that transition was also very intentional, that I had planned that. The pandemic accelerated it, but it was a plan to do that. And I knew that dance wasn't the only way I was meant to change people. So I there was the personal goals for me. And then I was like, I think there's something else I'm meant to do. But dance is always a part of it in my own personal practice. And I use a lot of movement in my coaching.
That's so interesting, because I think that for me, the dance space makes intimacy sometimes a little bit easier for people.
Sure.
And sometimes I kind of like find myself coaching people also through their life decisions.
Of course.
And yeah, just wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I think that, even this morning, I have this group of CEOs that I'm coaching, and it's about them building the skills to be better at their job. It's all female CEOs, and we start with movement. I mean, it's like 2 minutes, but we do like breath work and movement. And you see how, there's a bunch of studies about it that I was like, oh, that's validating what I already know, is that people are different after they move.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great.
Let's roll into the creating a personal brand for a dancer.
Okay.
So tell us a little bit about how dancers can establish a unique brand for themselves and showcase their skills and their talents. Are there any steps that you recommend?
Sure. I think the first thing is to come from a mindset of abundance. So a lot of times I see dancers or people in the dance industry, especially like the beautiful thing about belly dance is it feels very homegrown, but the hard thing about belly dance, I also now work a lot doing life coaching workshops and like yoga. And I'm like, oh, this is more of like a business. So I hope, before I say the mindset, that people start to take their belly dance business seriously, because when you take something seriously, it will come back to you in seriousness. And I think a lot of the reason I was able to grow a business is I came from a place of business, and I was like, I want this to provide for me. I want this to provide for, like, not me, but the 14 people who were teaching at the studio. And so I think that is important from mindset, is like, don't make it a little thing. And then coming from a mindset of abundance is the first thing I would say, because that allows people to step out of criticism and competition, because you don't really understand who you are when you are comparing yourself to other people. And we can't influence anything we're judging, including ourselves. So as soon as you're judging other people, we're like stacking them against ourselves. And so when I think there's enough for everyone, then I can think, what is unique about me in personal brand? And I really believe that everyone is unique. I almost think like It's like almost everybody's a slightly different flower or like a stone where there's somebody that's the right fit for everyone. So personal brand, do you want to look at, I would make a list of like, these are the dancers I love and be like, these are the characteristics that are their brand. Is it their movement? Is it their attitude? Is it their mindset? Is it their way that they approach something? Is it how they're studying? And while we never copy content, we can copy structure. Well, what's my take on studying the culture? What's my take on my costuming, my look? So I would say start to identify what other people have, and we don't want to copy that, but use that as inspiration. Come from a mindset of abundance so that I see myself. Like if you think about a field of flowers, I see myself as one that will attract the right customers, students, all of that. And then there's a brand for you as a dancer, and then there's a brand for you as a teacher. And those are two very different things. And so I would distinguish between both of those. And like at any point, there were times where I was developing my teaching brand more, and there was time when I was developing my performance brand more. So you can sort of choose, where am I right now? Where do I want to go? And getting inspirations for other people. And then what am I going to choose to make me unique? And that's both what I see in myself and what I'm going to choose to develop.
I wanted to ask you, Lisa, what advice do you have for dancers? Because, for example, for me, when I arrived to this country, like 10, 11 years ago, that I started to understand more about how I can commercialize, right, my talent and my art. I remember at the beginning, people wouldn't come to my classes.
Right.
And that has a great impact on my self-worth. What advice can you tell dancers that are starting their belly dance business and probably they're not getting the gigs that they want to get, and how we cannot be discouraged, right?
Sure.
Because I think for many artists, and I'm talking also about my personal experience, when we don't get that applause or that validation from others, somehow we feel like, oh, am I really good for this? Am I really have something to offer?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things about that. The first thing is you have to separate your personal self-worth from you as an artist, because you're not worthy because you're an artist, and you're also not worthy because you're a professional dancer. You are worthy because you're a human. All humans are worthy and loved. So I have to work to develop my idea of myself outside of any of those defining characteristics. Like I am worthy because I am who I am. And then there's also, here's my relationship with this as an art form, because I am also a creative and an artist. And this is my personal practice. And I have to separate that from who's choosing to buy from me, because that is different. We certainly need to practice. Like you want to create something that people want to purchase, but we want to think, here is me, the human, here's me, the artist, and then here's me, the business person. And those three things are related to together, but they're different. So we want to make sure for self-worth, like, when am I spending time with my dog or my partner or my mom? And like, that's actually me. And then what's my personal practice around dance? And what am I doing to fulfill myself as a creative? And then the business doesn't really have a lot to do with your self-worth, because when you remove that, you allow to do things like make mistakes. No business starts immediately and works. And so, I see people, they're like, I posted once about my class and nobody came. And I was like, of course they didn't. Nobody sees that. So like, and then in my business, I learned business skills. And also like my personal art and me are about me. Your business is about your clients. It's about me figuring out what they want as a performer and if I'm the right fit for that. It's about what are my standards and lines, but still like, what do my students want? Because when businesses don't work, when they make them about us, it's about the client. So I would say separate your self-worth. And when I feel good about myself, I can make changes in my business to make my clients happy.
I think those are such clear it's such a clear advice that you're giving. There's a lot of really good information, because I feel that many dancers, they begin with performing at bigger venues like haflas or weekend events, and they start to perform and they try and create their brand according to what they've performed or what costumes they're wearing or who they're wearing or who they're taking with, what teachers they're taking with, instead of being a little more reflective on what they themselves want instead of what the trends are setting for them.
Right.
So it's a challenge because we haven't really had much in general for dancers, for belly dancers specifically, like pathways or avenues that we
Sure.
could follow that are a little less, for the lack of a better word, emotional, and less of the like deficient side of the egos, like the weaker sides.
Right.
Whereas we should be really questioning, okay, I really enjoy this art form. What is it that I can give back, or what is it that I can share that is unique to myself? For me personally, I started with a dance studio. So I wanted to ask about branding as a dancer in two ways. For dancers that are still working within a dance studio, what advice do you give? I guess we'll just leave it for that question first. And then what advice would you give to them to develop their own brand, but they're still within a studio?
Right. I'm going to go back and say one thing about the previous question, and then I'll answer that, which is my other thing is, like, do the darn work. Like, you don't have a personal brand a year in. Some people do, and they're exceptional. I had a personal brand, but that was built on 18 years of dance. And I wasn't that, I had a lot more work to do before I started getting hired at a very large scale. So listen, like, that's where we separate it, because then that's not ego. It's like, let me do the work, because it's very fulfilling if I do the work. So I just wanted to say that my personal brand, when you're in a studio, I think it's amazing. What an opportunity, because then you don't have to do everything. When I'm talking about this third pillar of the business, you get support, there's somebody else buying all the toilet paper. Like, as soon as you open the studio, I have to be like, people are like, I want a studio. I was like, get ready. It's hard. It's a brick and mortar. That's already a tough business model. So I like to think about, you have to think about yourself as the artist in the gallery. The gallery creates support. The gallery has a brand, and you get to exist in that place as a brand. So, like, if I am a painter and I have a show in a gallery, I get to show what I'm working on. I get to show who I am, but I have the support of this other brand. So first you have to choose, like, if I'm having a hard time with this, is this the right studio for me? Is the first question. Like, and you have to have very honest and open conversations with either the manager or the owner of the studio. But then within that, I think there's almost an opportunity to develop yourself more, because you don't have to worry about all the rent, paying the rent. Like, even if you're just renting space, like, that's more work. So I think that, and then I would say, go back to, it's about service. How can I serve the studio? And then the studio will serve me back. When I had teachers who were working for me, I would really showcase the teacher. We gave them a lot of opportunity, but they also, the teachers who did the best, like, added something to the studio, because the best place to showcase your brand is in the studio, because they already have an audience. Offer to do things for their social media. Can I do a live? Can I do a takeover? We did that all the time. And then those teachers got in front of our 10,000 Instagram followers. Think about a way that you can help the studio that will also help you. Do something, a collaboration with another teacher there. Get inspired. And then the other thing I would say is, the more you can develop your personal brand, the more leverage you're going to have with whatever business you're working in. I coach a lot of creatives. I coach a lot of, like, large scale fine artists. And that is a business where galleries have a lot more pull than dance studios do. And I say, develop your brand, develop your Instagram following, because the larger influence you have, the more negotiation you have. So you want to get into a place where, if I bring students, audience, good content, I'm showing up on time, I get more ability to negotiate my power within the studio. So to develop your own brand, and then think about how you can leverage your relationship in a place that's a good fit for you.
And I'm assuming vice versa too, the owners of the studio
yeah.
to, catch what, instructors they have that are doing really well and help them, rise up as well.
It's not going to work unless it's a symbiotic relationship. So I think both people, there were times that I worked at studios where it wasn't a right fit and I left. Keep it up here, keep it professional, don't burn the bridges, but just this isn't the right fit. And then we're just pointing at each other. And then the other side is the studio should be doing the same thing. The studio should be doing it, but the studio also is a brand and a business where, like, if the teacher's not helpful, they can say this isn't the good fit either.
I had one of my most successful collaborations was when I was working at Belly to Apps, which the owner of the studio, she's like, you guys can do whatever you want. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do a festival together.
Yeah.
Let's do workshops. Let's do the Les Pajama Party. And like, for me, it was a beautiful place of freedom and experimentation, where I also got a lot of like important, valuable business information. And it was great for me because I had somebody that was taking care of the most annoying stuff. Right. But then I could actually, and that's how I actually evolve as a producer in the studio, because Adriana Echeverri, which was the owner of Belly to Apps, helped me out.
Yeah.
I brought my ideas and she was like, let's make it happen. And I basically inherit that audience that is the one that is coming still to my classes, still to my workshops, still to my events. So I think it's an amazing way for dancers also to grow within that umbrella. And I want to jump to the question about how important is for dancers to network with other dancers to build a community in order for them to succeed.
It's not going to work without it. I mean, you exist within a community, so why self-isolation? I've never seen, if you studied, one thing I did when I started is I studied who's the most successful at this. One, how are they dancing? I got to learn about that. But two, like, how are they running their business? If you self-isolate, it's never going to work. And if you get snotty, it's never going to work. If you get critical, it's never going to work. And people who hear that, they're going to remember it. I remember hearing people and I was like, if they're talking about her, they're probably talking about me. And, I wouldn't even say a network. I would say, like, make friends, make a community, support people, support their events. I used to go watch my friends dance all the time, and it was the most fun. And I still enjoy that so much and help people understand them. Because this is what I think. If you had a favorite boutique, I would go to it and it existed on a street by itself. I'd go maybe once a month. If there was a boutique district, I would go once a week, but I'd still go to my favorite one the most. So for me, like, when I started in Asheville, there wasn't a lot of belly dance. When I ended, there was a lot. But more people knew about belly dance, so it was great for my business. So I think, like, you really have to think about the long run. Like, I didn't have non-competes because I was like, one, I can't pay these people full time, but also the more they go and teach, the more people will come to them. And I also trusted in my ability to shine to the right people. Yeah. So I think, yes, network. And, like, don't network ever from a place of what can this person give me, but what can I give them? So when I moved to new towns, the first thing I did is I would pay the dancer in the city for a private lesson. And they might be like, you've been dancing for 12 years. I've been dancing for 6. And I was like, what are you going to do? I'll pay you. I'll teach you. Like, I'm happy to put my money. I'm happy to come watch you dance. I'm happy to help you. I'll sell the tickets at the Hafla. As somebody who won Belly Dancer of the Universe, like, you don't have to do that. I'm like, sure, why not? I'll help. Be part of the community. And this is not just belly dance, but if you help other people, you will build an invaluable network.
For sure. And, that word of self-isolating, love that term because, yes, I think sometimes, personal stuff can get in the way. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we have to kind of like put that aside and think about the bigger goal that we have as a community also. This is a collaboration. Belly Dance Stories basically is a collaboration from two competitors.
Right.
We always mention that. But it also feels good that whenever I'm struggling with something, I go to her and she's like, well, you know what? This worked for me. Something as simple, like I have never taught on Sundays. She was telling me like how good was her Sundays. And I'm like, okay, let me try it out. It went well.
Right.
If it wasn't because I had this communication and this friendship that I developed with her, I would have not, even find out that because I
Right.
was too afraid to, let's say, have a class on Sunday based on my experience.
Because what's a full class for you? 30, 20,
10,
10?
15.
How many people live in Miami?
Yeah,
Like,
a
we
lot.
can't be like, oh, I'm going to take all of them. You can't.
Yes.
And
yes.
I always think about a magnet, like you're going to attract the people who want you. And there's also like time, geography, all that kind of thing. But you all could teach at the exact same time and it would be fine. Yeah.
Yeah, Miami is a very big city,
Yes.
and the more that we can team up with each other, the more Miami will know that there are very good belly dancers in
Sure.
this city, and we have a very long history. Well, I think it's a very good long history of belly dance in Miami, and what was I gonna say? It was about what you were saying.
Connecting our friendship, sharing
Yes.
experiences.
And also having challenging conversations too with who quote quote your competitor may be, and usually that sparks stronger friendships. To go and to not be so fearful to speak to, that person who is also at the same level or maybe even higher, and just ask for advice or friendship or to team up in this case. And look, we've done so much, and it's still going. So
I'm very grateful for the relationships that I have developed here in the dance community of Miami. Like, I have people like Shayna, which she's gonna be with us in our next event of the transformation, which I can count on her and tell her, hey Shayna, like, I need to make extra money. Can you like give me extra gigs? And she shows up.
Yeah.
But precisely because we have developed such a tight and beautiful relationship that transformed into a friendship.
Yeah, and she's operating out of service. I was just in Cairo, and the thing I noticed is how many of the big dancers there are friends with each other. Because, like, you also need, when I talked about those 3 pillars, there's also still you as a human. You need friendship. You need support. You need people who will help you with the business part. So it's all of those 3 pillars need community around it. So I would say yes. And like go outside. I've learned so much from dancers who weren't belly dancers.
Outside of our dance community.
like
Period.
what?
Yeah, like for me, I mean, obviously coaches now, but when I was a dancer, I really befriended and studied from and learned from people in yoga, in hip hop, in flamenco, in modern, in places where there's a different way of doing business, in a place where there's a different way of studying, in a place where there's, like there was much, in flamenco, there's much more like a stronger teacher, elevated teacher. You do this for 5 years and then you might get to be in a show. And I was like, oh, that kind of respect for the teacher. How are they cultivating that? I was looking at people doing hip hop shows where they were getting sponsorships from like Nike. And I was like, well, what can we learn from that? I have friends who are belly dancers and now clients all over the world. People who, there are dancers within this dance form and outside of this dance form that have very large businesses. And there's a lot to be learned from those people. And all the people who've succeeded are generous. So, like, go out and understand. Make friends with the lighting guy. See what you're going to learn.
Getting out of the box and our own comfort zone is very important.
Always.
You meet new people, new stories. You get to learn how they made it. And usually we find a lot of similarities in the ways that they conduct their business. But we would never know unless we would go and actually say hello, have a conversation, or ask, their story.
Yeah, absolutely.
We hope you're enjoying the conversation so far.
We want to thank our sponsors, Heart Hips Minds by Sarah Chan, Kathy Lamis Martin, HCAB Studios, and Andrej Gottlich.
Now let's get back to the conversation. Our show, Belly Stories, is about storytelling.
Yes.
So we wanted to ask you, do you incorporate storytelling into your coaching practice to inspire individuals to pursue their passions?
Yes. I think you need to use storytelling to use your voice. I think that stories are the way that we educate, inspire, and transform people. I'm also a public speaker, and I really believe that speaking should be based in stories. And I think that I use stories all the time in coaching, allowing people to develop their own stories, telling them stories about other clients, myself, because otherwise everything stays heady. It doesn't feel real. Stories make things real. Stories inspire you. Stories are amazing. Like, to me, stories are the thing.
They're memorable too.
Yeah. It's interesting because I have a podcast, and on that podcast, I have a public speaking coach, and he's Cuban. He's from Miami. And randomly, I was standing outside of his parents' building the other day. I was texting him. He was like, "It's this address." I was like, "That's weird. It's right there." And he was talking about the concept of duende. To him, is like this. And I started talking about tarab, which is the like Arabic version of that, which is funny because it's Hanan's show name. And, but that to me is like, he was like, we want to get people from a speaking perspective to that place where they're just in flow, the duende. And I was like, oh, and for us, it's called tarab. And to me, that's what you also want that in your business.
That's so great.
Well, I mean, storytelling is one of the oldest art forms, if not the oldest art form of humans. That's how we started communicating with each other over the fires, and the paintings on the caves.
And preserving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and to take it back to the, to the roots of our dance, you're standing there in these, it's wild to stand and like look at hieroglyphics and be like, that's what does 5,000 years mean? I'm staring at it like, but there's storytelling, not that belly dance is directly related to hieroglyphics, but to see that and realize that it is an ancient form. It's like they were telling the story of their lives.
Well, let's recap a little bit about what we've been learning from Lisa. And we started off with your personal story, your connection to dance, and that you owned a studio for a while, and then you went into coaching, and from people around you, from your network around you, they were telling you that you have this gift, and then you listened to them, and then you went for it. I think that's a very interesting concept, because many times people might tell us, wow, you're really good at this, and maybe we're too shy to consider that could be our career. Who knows what or why, but you went for it, something that you went back to school on.
I went for it. I trusted it, and I didn't expect it overnight. To go back to that conversation, like the year I started it, the first class I taught, the first studio I owned, I lived in, because I was like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to figure out how. So there was like a wall 3/4 of the way back, and I lived behind it. And I just share my bathroom with the studio, which meant I was the neatest I ever have been in my life. And I was like, I'm going to figure out how to do this. But like, I didn't walk into the 7-figure business. And in fact, that happened because of my passion, not because I was trying to create a business of that size. I didn't walk in and was like, oh, let's just give her this belly dance of the universe type. Like, it took me a long time to train to be able to win something. I didn't walk in and like all these people wanted me to help them. It came from a deep belief in myself that I could do it. And I embraced the times that it was hard and slow. And I had another job. I was a bookkeeper for years while I ran the studio. And then my business supported the studio for a long time, meaning Lisa Zahiya, the dancer, was like paying for the studio because the studio needed time to cultivate. And then it got to the point where the studio was making all this money. But if I had been like a year in, it'd been like, oh, it's not working. I never would have seen or had the experiences that I had.
Yeah, you need the struggle.
And tell us a little bit more about if you had a very memorable challenge that really kind of pushed you to continue that you still remember, do you have any?
Oh, like a lot of them.
Okay.
I think that first year, I tried to put the floor together by myself, and it would pull apart sometimes while people were dancing on it. Like, it was a mess, and I was like, I'm gonna hurt somebody. I don't know how to do this. I don't have any money to fix it. And then I like started saving dollar for dollar. Living in a dance studio isn't fun. Like, I think people see my life now and they're like, oh, she's so fancy and she's got this. And I was like, it took a very long time. I remember being like, I remember the hardest part for me was probably actually the fact of how much I had to pay for the studio, because I was working as a bookkeeper. So I was making pretty good money doing that. But more like my belly dance classes weren't paying me the way that I would pay other teachers. And then my classes were paying the rent because my classes were the biggest. And so I really thought, how can we brand this towards the other teachers? But I never got resentful, because I was like, I don't have to do this. First of all, I could go get a job and I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to figure it out. And then the studio really started to take off, and I realized I'd never thought about weather. And we had a January where, like, here's the thing about a dance studio. You only have 4 nights, really: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then a little bit of the weekend. And you really only have the evening. So it's a very limited amount of time to make money. And it snowed in January, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of every week. So of the 16 days where I made most of my income, I think I got like 4 of them. And I took thousands of dollars from myself and paid for the studio and the teachers and this. And that I was just like, no, I'm going to figure it out. So I never gave up on the idea. The other really hard thing that happened was COVID, because, that studio at the time, I think my rent was $6,000 a month. Like, that doesn't go away. And I wasn't willing to, I did not have it in me to lay anybody off. So I made that digital studio overnight. It was crappy. And then what I would say to people is, I was like, guess what? Tomorrow it's going to be better. It's going to be better. And I got this. I also sort of saw the writing on the wall, and I was like, this isn't going to be 2 weeks. It's going to be 2 years, which it was. And like that, we originally just closed the studio, and I was like, I'm not going to reopen, but we're going to stay online. We ended up making more online than we ever made in a month, because we started getting people all over the world. And that was really exciting. And then I ended up merging that with another studio, and now they have those classes. But I was just like, it was so hard in the beginning. And it was my money, because it was before those loans came out. But I was just like, the vision was first, and the desire to serve was first, because I taught an online class like 2 days after it started, because I was like, we got to do it. We got to go. And I got to help these people.
Yeah, that was one of the questions that I was thinking as you were talking about that story, is how did you not let the money blind you from your passion?
Oh, there's people be like, money doesn't grow on trees. And I'm like, it's paper. Yes, it does. There's money to be had in the universe. I'm going to figure it out. Money won't stop me. No, there's money to be had. I will find it. And it might seem like that's easier for me to say that now because I have an established business, but I very much felt that then. There were points where it was like dwindling, and it was like the credit card shuffle. I'm going to do this. I'm going to pay this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to ask my parents. But I put the service in front of the money. And I was like, if I drive the boat towards the thing I want, the like wake is the money, and it's coming. And when it came in like an overabundance of blessings. But like, I would have times also where I'd be like, we're going to bring in 100 kids from public housing and we're going to teach them dance. And people would just be like, I would talk about it and I'd get excited, and I never needed money. And people would just be like, we're going to give you money for that. We're going to do this. But I put even now, I put my passion and my service in front of the money, because now I could go buy laundromats and be a multimillionaire and not have to work, but I want to work. I want to do what I'm doing. And I allow abundance in my life. So money has shown up, and you learn how to become like a friend of money. So it shows up more and more often. That's a whole other topic. But I just was like, I'm going to figure it out.
I think the biggest thing that I've taken away from this conversation is the mindset. That's number one before anything else, before any thoughts about how am I going to run my business, how am I going to brand myself, is that mindset. So thank you, Lisa. I think it's a very powerful space that you start from.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that, you know, like what if we allow the passion to drive us and not the, you know, like, well, I really think sometimes with belly dancer, I'd be coaching people and I'd be like, they would be crying and I'd be like, why are you doing this? Like, if it doesn't feel good, stop. Why? You know, none of us have to belly dance. Some very few people do because it is their full-time income. But I'm like, if this isn't joyful, we're not building weapons. We're not doing people's taxes. Like, nothing's going to happen if it's bad. Like, if your performance is bad, I've had terrible performances. Oh my God.
We all have.
Where you're like, sorry guys. I hope my costume looked good. But, you know, like, it doesn't matter. But that goes back to those 3 pillars. Like, if I think I'm okay, you know, the money will come. But I was always like, I will climb a wall with my long red fingernails and figure this out. Let's figure it out. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much, Lisa.
You're welcome.
I think for me, it's been like a reconfirmation of a lot of things that I thought that I was doing well, that I'm like, okay, yes. And I do feel that doing business, regardless the type of business that you're doing, is an emotional training.
Sure.
And for me, it really resonates that you're saying, which is like, how do I work with me as a person has a big impact in my delivery to others and the type of work that I do to others. And I want everybody to keep that in mind, because I think it's so important to also, you know, do that personal work. And that eventually it's gonna has an impact in everything that you do, in every relationship that you create also.
Of course. Well, like, if I may, since we have another minute, I'm going to mildly hijack this. What, like, for you, what is this change? Like, what would, because we can hear, I think people hear things and they're like, yeah. And then they go back to what I call their emotional home and habits, which can be like, everything's wrong. What would this actually change for you? What would you do differently?
If you have an answer,
either
you can go first.
Yeah.
What I will do different?
After, like, hearing these things.
After hearing this, I think I just feel encouraged to continue, you know, doing this path. I think, like, after the pandemic was a moment where I really went through some type of existential crisis, and solitude gave me, because before the pandemic, I used to have a studio. I used to own Creative Hips, but I used to have like 3 or 4 jobs on the side. And like, I was working 24/7. And that had a really impact in every type of relationship that I had in my life, because I basically didn't have time for anything.
Right.
Not even to be by myself. And after that, when the pandemic came, that I remember the first 2 weeks, I was like, oh my God, did I wanted this so bad that the universe, you know, gave me this? You know, I was like, I kind of like this.
I think a lot of people thought that. Yeah.
And like, everybody was feeling anxious, and I'm like, oh my God, this is all I needed. But also with time, I started to rethinking also a lot about me as a person. You know, I was 30, single. Do I want to have kids? You know, I went through all these type of questions, and I went through a lot of conclusions. And then at a moment, I'm like, you know, I'm going to have kids. I'm going to have in vitro, even though I don't have anybody. And then I got into this mojo that I was feeling super anxious for the amount of pressure that I was put into myself.
Right.
And then it got to a moment that I was like, you know what? I'm going to let it flow. I'm just going to work with myself. I noticed that, you know, being by myself, I am not completely comfortable. So that means that I am not in a good company.
Right.
And you know, I started like really meditating, journaling, which was things that I was not doing before. I started to be more, I started to really also curate better the people that I was hanging out around, and spending more time also with certain relationships and people that will really fuel my soul. And that was transformative for me, totally transformative. So to hear you saying all of this, it gives me a lot of faith. And I think faith is something that people tends to relate to religion. And hearing you, I just feel like I wouldn't done anything different. I just feel like I feel more faithful about myself.
What do you want to do to amplify those things for yourself? Trust in yourself.
Trust in myself. Continue trusting my gut. Continue cultivating my intuition. And I think continue meeting wonderful people like you.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the opposite of Val a little bit. I'm very self-reflective. So I take a lot of time thinking, writing, planning. And I think that this conversation helped me more to fuel my fire a little bit better and to just put more discipline and pressure. So I'm the opposite. I'm now, thinking, okay, I got to put more pressure, but the pressure is focused, on positive changes or the mindset that I want to go forward with my business or my branding, or for Belly Dance Stories. But the conversation really did validate a lot of things that I have thought about, that I have worked out through. And I think that service is the number one thing for me.
Yeah.
That has impacted my work a lot, because I always, when I teach, for example, I'm more fulfilled than when I perform. And while directing Belly Dance Stories and doing the podcast and doing all the background work that we had to do, that was beautiful. So that just, the conversation kind of just validated, okay, I just have to put a little more discipline in where my focus is. And I think that's it. I mean, yeah, it was really dense. I for sure will have to go back and listen to this conversation.
Yeah, the only reason I ask, I think for everyone listening, the thing I would leave people with is with this podcast or with any podcast where it's really easy to like fill ourselves with ideas and it's harder to take action on them. So just challenge everybody to be like, so now what am I going to choose to try to do differently?
And actually go forward and do it and not be too much in our heads, because then we get trapped and then we have, feelings, and then that's our roadblocks.
Yeah, in your head, you're dead. You cannot change anything in your head. You have to go take action. Move.
And even in the smallest of ways, whether
baby steps,
whether it's going to take a walk with someone and talking to them about, I'm a moving speaker.
Me too.
Yeah, I like to have conversations on walks. So if one day we can just do the podcast on a walk, that'd be great, because I think better, I speak better. But yeah, it's in our heads is we get caught.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Lisa.
you so
You're
much,
welcome.
Lisa.
Go team.
Yay.
Go team.
Thank you for joining us on the Belly Dance Stories podcast. Ready to write your story with us? Send them to our email, bellydancestories@gmail.com.
Visit our website for the latest news about our production at bellydancestories.com. And remember that you can follow us on Instagram at bellydance_stories. And remember,
let your body speak loud and beautiful.